From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
If you search David Baldacci, like I did, in the Library of Congress's online catalog, you get 89 results. Not only are his novels in the library's collections, but movies inspired by his novels are also included, as well as books that he contributed to, and versions of his books in languages other than English. Anybody want to guess how many different languages his books have been translated into? 45. Hey, who said that? 45 is right. It's awesome. Are you related? So he's a prolific writer, but David is also a devoted philanthropist, and his greatest efforts are dedicated to his family's Wish You Well Foundation. Established by David and his wife, Michelle, the Wish You Well Foundation supports family and adult literacy in the United States. Today, David is here to talk with us about The Width of the World, Book 3 in his instant best-selling Vega Jane series. Please join me in welcoming best-selling author David Baldacci.
Hey everybody, are you having a great time at the festival? I know, it's, somebody asked me, what's the great thing about book festivals? And I said, the great thing about book festivals is that it brings people together who may not have read a book for a while, or people who love books and read lots of them, and everybody in between. The worst thing about book festivals, they're too rare. There aren't enough of them, I don't think. And I always talk about this and make this point when I come to a book festival. If you have a book festival in your town, never take it for granted. Because once you start taking it for granted, it will go away, and you won't have it anymore because people won't come and it'll just sort of slide away. I've seen it happen to other festivals. This is the National Book Festival. We have got this. We're going to come every year, and it's going to get bigger and better. I've written lots of books, mostly adult stuff, thrillers that my own kids couldn't read until they were a little bit older. I remember the first time my daughter, who's now grown and moved on, read one of my books. Her mom said it was okay to read one of my thrillers, and it was split second in the King and Maxwell series, sort of a pretty intense book. And my wife and I came home from dinner one night, and every light in the house was on. Her bedroom door was locked. I think she had the bureau shoved against the door. We have two big dogs. Both of them were in bed with her once we get the door open. And she told her mom later, she goes, "Mom, I get it. I understand why Dad's so popular. He's really good, but he's also like a freak." When she was in kindergarten, you have parents come to school day to let, what your mom and dad do for a living. My daughter never invited me. And I asked her that, she got older, and I said, "Why didn't you invite me?" And she goes, "Well, what are you going to do, Dad? Come in and write in a book? Sign your name? How exciting is that? We got cops, we got firemen, I didn't want to be embarrassed, I'm sorry." I am a writer today because I was a reader as a kid. I was a library rat, instead of a gym rat, I was a library rat. And I would go to my school library, I would go to the county public library in Richmond, Virginia, every weekend with my brother and sister. And I had secret deals with the librarians. They let me check out more books than they were supposed to let me check out, because I knew I would read all of them and come back for more the next week. And I saw the world through books. I never really left Richmond as a kid, didn't have the opportunity, but I saw a much broader spectrum of life, existence, perspective, opinion, ideas, and wisdom and knowledge from the books that I would open. I went into the author's room, where there's sort of a break room for all the authors here today, and it was such a wonderful thing because there were so many young authors in there. I mean, that's the new voices of the future. That's the fresh blood of an industry. They're going to write books that today do not exist and won't exist until they sit down and create them. And that's such a wonderful, wonderful thing. I've been doing this a long time now. 20 years ago, I was a new kid on the block. I think that's a band, or used to be anyway, showing my age. But it really all began for me as a writer because I was a reader. Now, I was one of those kids growing up who never shut up. You know, that's why I went on later to become a trial lawyer. Very similar skill set there, you know, never shutting up, being a trial lawyer. So, and I would always tell these tall tales, you know, usually to get myself out of trouble with parents, assorted school officials, people like that. And one day my mom came to me and she said, I bought you this journal. I went to this bookstore, I bought you this journal. It's a blank page journal. Why don't you write down some of the stuff you've been talking about all these years? And I said, okay. So I put my pen to paper. And it was like this epiphany. It's like this aha moment. Oh my gosh, I can take what's up here and I can put it down on this, and eventually other people can read it. Just like the books that I love to read, that I'm enthralled by, I can have that same sort of effect over other people. And from that moment on, I was 8 or 9 years old. I really never looked back from that. I just kept writing. And years later, I went back to my mom and I said, my God, Mom, thank you. What a gift you gave me that day. And my mom, you know, looked at me and said, honey, I'm so glad it's worked out for you. But quite frankly, I just wanted to shut you up. You know, I'm your mom. I love you. I will always love you. But even moms need a little peace and quiet, you know. So that journal did it for her. Now, when I tour around, I get a lot of questions from people. Usually, you know, the question I get more than the answer is, what is it like to be this #1 worldwide best-selling novelist? You know, I know the way they ask the question, they want some sort of, you know, Entertainment Weekly kind of answer, you know. Yes, I have a life just like the Kardashians do. My life is nothing like the Kardashians. You know, I go to these cool events sometimes. I come home and I start telling my wife about them, and she's like, yeah, it's trash night. Get on it. People always ask me, you know, in every book you've ever written, there are strong, independent women. Why is that? Well, I was raised by one, I'm married to one, and we raised one. And that's all I've ever known my whole life. I don't write about damsels in distress for one reason. I've never met any, you know, just never have. A lot of my guy friends need an awful lot of help, you know, which we will freely admit, you know, but not so much the women. But in answer to that question, what is it like to be a best-selling novelist, I tell a story about my kids when they were little. My kids are both grown now, but my daughter was 5 or 6. I took her to a bookstore for the first time for a book signing that I was doing. Walked into the store, and she, you know, all the people were there, and the lady who ran the store came over, introduced herself, and asked my daughter, do you know why all these people are here? And my daughter said, yes, I do know. And she goes, why are they here? They want my dad to sign their book. And why do they want your dad to sign their book? Because my dad has the nicest handwriting. She's been out of college a few years now. I think she still believes that, actually. Well, my son was maybe 3. I took him to a bookstore for the first time, not for an event. I just took him to a bookstore, so, you know, to buy some books. And my son has always been kind of like my entrepreneur guy, you know, always looking, what's the next thing, the next big thing? So we walked into the bookstore, and he saw all the books and all the people reading, and his eyes got huge. And all of a sudden, my kid started running across the bookstore at the top of his speed, screaming at the top of his lungs, my daddy will sign any book you've got for $2. So that's what it's like to be a best-selling novelist. My handwriting is beautiful, and I charge $2 to sign your book. Because I love this festival so much, I have waived my book signing fee today, and will sign your book free of charge. Now, it's one thing to be a writer, want to be a writer, and another thing actually being a writer who can support yourself. So back then, I was writing short stories. Short stories are great for young, aspiring writers because they're short. And you can finish one and sort of feel good about yourself. So I did that for about 15 years. And I had to earn a living, so I went on to college, and I went to law school at UVA in Charlottesville, and then spent time practicing law in D.C., in this city, for about 10 years. But writing the whole time in my off hours, you know, middle of the night, early in the morning, wherever I could find some time. And people ask, you know, was it a hard transition moving from being a lawyer to being a writer, a fiction writer? And I said, no, you know, being a lawyer actually is a great background for writing fiction. Because as a lawyer, you know, it was like the more I made up, the more I won, which is awesome. You know, so it's actually a way to write effectively and to argue persuasively. When you're a lawyer, you have the same set of facts. It's called a trial record. So it's not like you're entitled to your own opinion, but not your own facts, in other words. That doesn't seem to be the case these days, actually, but I'm not going to talk about that. But you write in a way that's persuasive before a judge or a jury, and that's telling a story. So the transition actually wasn't all that difficult, going from being a lawyer to being a writer. I wrote short stories, screenplays, eventually moved on to novels. I saw a statistic the other day that was astounding to me that 70% of Americans don't really enjoy their work. And it's almost 3/4 of the population. And the reason, you know, I hate that is because we spend so much time at work. But people find their joy and interest in positive things outside of work. It could be, you know, a sport that you like, friends, family, your church, whatever. We find, you know, lots of ways to be happy. But we do spend a lot of time working, and we should be happy doing that. And I tell people, you know, it sounds like a cliche to follow your dream, but it's actually maybe more complicated than that. You have to work hard at whatever you want to do, but it's worthwhile taking some time early on trying to decide what it is really that interests you. And it could take months, weeks, years, decades to actually finally find out what it is. But because you're going to be spending your whole life doing it, which is a really, really, really long time, it's worthwhile taking the time to try to figure out what would bring me joy. Because look, if you love what you do, another cliche, you never work a day in your life. Writing is hard. Any creative endeavor is hard because you're creating something that did not exist before you thought of it. It's not like really any other job. You know, you get good at other jobs by sort of doing the same thing over and over again and working out all the bugs, working out all the kinks. I mean, I fly a lot. I wouldn't even be on a plane when the pilot that day says, you know what, I've never tried this before. But today I'm going to go for it. Or a surgeon on an operating table. You know, I've done this procedure for 30 years with my right hand. Let's see what it feels like with my left. But as a writer, every day is different. There is no formula. There is no template for what you're supposed to do. You just sit down and try to think of something that might be interesting to you. But if you find a passion in life, particularly with your work, treat it as the special moment that it is. Because all of a sudden you have this eureka moment, and this is how I can spend my life. Passion rarely comes around in life, particularly with what you do for a living. So don't let it pass by. Seize it, you know, and use it, and move on with your life, and do that sort of thing. You don't want to look back 50 or 60 years from now and wondering, you know, maybe I should have decided and gone down that other path. It's worthwhile, I think, to think about these things. My first novel was Absolute Power. It was about the president, a burglar, a cover-up, the truth coming out. And people said, well, you were an overnight success. And I said, yes, I was. It only took me 6,000 nights to get there. I just wanted to tell a good story. I had no idea if this book was going to be successful. I'd had very little success with my short stories and my screenplays. But I've always thought that if you write with passion, that passion will kiss the words that you're writing about and will lift it up out of the sludge piles that are sitting on editors' desks in New York City. You don't want to write a trend book. A trend book is like what's hot, what's really hot out there. I can guarantee you, you know, when Jurassic Park first came out, every script and every book pitched to anybody had dinosaurs. I don't care if it was a romantic comedy. There was going to be a Tyrannosaurus Rex right in the middle of this little tryst going on. Or when the Da Vinci Code came out, everybody wanted to write the code book because it was hot. Or the Harry Potter series, everybody wanted to do wizards and witches and stuff like that. But if you're not interested in actually that subject matter, guess what's going to happen? You're going to run out of gas. It could be a quarter of the way through, half the way through, and the book's not going to be that good because you weren't really interested in writing it anyway. You just thought it might sell, and you sell the movie rights, and then you could, you know, fax in your resignation from the job you didn't like. Not a really great motivation to write a book. The old adage is write what you know. I would modify that a little bit to say write what you would like to know about. Then you sort of immerse yourself in a world that you really didn't know before, but have been fascinated by for a long time. And guess what happens? You spend a lot of time thinking about it, you spend a lot of time working on it, and all of a sudden the sentences become better, the paragraphs become better, the chapters become more enthralling, the story becomes more powerful. It really does work that way. It's almost like you're putting the right kind of fuel inside your car. Otherwise, if it's just tracing a trend, you're putting in stuff that's just not going to ignite into anything. Now, with the Vega Jane series, I love fantasy. How many people love reading fantasy? Yeah, it's awesome stuff. There's a lot of fantasy going on in D.C. right now. But I will not speak of that. But I heard people say it a lot, so it must be true. So about, I guess, 7 or 8 years ago, like my mother did years before, my wife gave me a blank page book for Christmas. Do not ever give a writer a blank paper on a major holiday. Because I immediately ran away to my little cubbyhole and started writing. And I wrote this name down on the first page, Vega Jane. I have no idea where the name came from. It just sounded really great. It was in my mind. And I wanted to write a fantasy about Vega Jane. And 5 years later, it was done. And it took me about 4.25 years to understand what I wanted to write about with this person, what the story was going to even be about. But after 4.25 years of really thinking about it, obsessing about it, then I wrote the entire first book in about 7 or 8 months. And nobody knew I was writing it. None of my friends, my publisher, my agent, no one, other than my wife. She read it and really enjoyed it. And she is a tough critic. I know she's here somewhere. You know, I won't ask her to stand up, but I can sense your presence. And when we sent the book out to publishers, I was adamant about this point. I sent the book out under a pseudonym, a fake name, because I wanted the book to be accepted on its merits, not because my name was attached to it. So I used the name Janus Pope. Janus is the Roman two-faced god. I was being very deceitful. And Pope was just that Catholic thing, you know. You never know where names are going to come from. So when Scholastic ended up buying the first book in the series, The Finisher, the way the book is written, the terms, colloquialisms, and all that, they thought I was from England. So when I went to Scholastic in New York and introduced myself as the author of The Finisher, they were quite shocked. You know, Clifford, you know, the big red dog, he like fainted. He's in the lobby up there. It's like, boom. For me, writing that book was an enormous challenge. I'd never written that genre before. But it's great in life, no matter what you do, to get out of your comfort zone, you know, to scare yourself. People say, you know, what really drives you as a writer? And I say, fear. Fear drives me as a writer. You know, can I tell another good story or not? You know, you have this recurring nightmare that people are going to wake up one day and realize you have no idea what you're doing. You know, you ever have that recurring dream when you're in school, you're back in school, and you either showed up naked for a test, or you haven't been to class all year, and now you have to take the exam and you know nothing what's on there. You know, psychologically, you know, there's a lot of stuff that go into these interpretive dreams, and they show anxiety in your life, loss in your life, some type of nervous situation you're addressing, so you dream about it in that symbolic way. And that's why we all share those dreams, because we share those types of anxieties. But for me, to get out of my comfort zone and write this book was really important as a writer. I think it made me a better thriller writer for having written this fantasy series. So the book came out, hit #1, and you know, was very well received. I used my name when the book came out. Scholastic insisted upon that. I think it probably did help sales. But Vega Jane is the lead character. She's a young girl, and as I just mentioned before, she's a very strong, independent female. And she lives in a little village called Wormwood in the middle of nowhere. And you have no idea what time period this is set. And around Wormwood is this place called the Quag. And there's nothing beyond the Quag. So there's no reason to leave Wormwood. And the Quag is filled with dangerous beasts, so just stay in Wormwood, the little village, and you'll be fine. Perfectly safe. You don't have to take a chance or a risk, which is sort of symbolic of what I was trying to say about getting out of your comfort zone. It's almost like in the universe saying, you know, we're the only planet out of 8,700,000 trillion planets that might have life on it. So we should just stay where we are because it'll be safe here. Vega Jane realizes everything she's been told in her life is a lie. Everything. About Wormwood, the people who live there, their history, everything. So she breaks out of Wormwood and goes to the Quag, fights her way through the Quag in the second novel, The Keeper, and then we come to The Width of the World. The Width of the World title comes from one line in the epic poem Beowulf. I love just the alliterative, how that rolls off the tongue, the width of the world. And it really talks about the world as they knew it back then. This is the breadth and spectrum of the world in this epic poem. And in this book, The Width of the World, that came out in the spring, she's in a brand new world. Unlike a lot of fantasies, for every book that I wrote, I had to create a brand new world because Vega kept escaping from places. So the finisher was Wormwood, the keeper was the Quag, and now in The Width of the World, she had broken free from the Quag, was now in this place that looked more modern. It would have things that we would recognize, buildings and the clothing people wore and automobiles and things like that. And it seems like a safe place. It seems like the people are very happy. But Vega Jane soon realizes that people there are sort of suffering the worst form of enslavement because they don't even know they're actually enslaved. So there's no opportunity or chance of any type of insurrection because they just feel so good about everything, not even knowing the fact that they're not free. Now, I wrote this series as sort of not for young readers, not for old readers, not for in-between readers. I only know one way to tell a story. I bring my A game. And just because I was writing for middle grade readers, that was a category that sort of the industry puts on this book, that meant nothing to me. All I know is that I was going to be writing for myself, but also for really smart people out there who probably read a lot of fantasy, regardless of whether they're 10 or 110. And we're going to, judge this book on how good the story was, how good the writing was, and what it was really about. So when people say, is it easier to write for young readers, I said, it's not easy to write for any reader. And so you really have to bring your A game. And it's plot, character, action, twists and turns. The only really conscious choice I made was maybe, word selection here and there. Certain words that I might use in an adult book I wouldn't use in a book like this. So I'm working on the 4th novel now. We just got a title for it. Scholastic said, the legal department said I can't reveal that title. I hate lawyers, don't you? I mean, what do they get off doing that? I got some stuff going on. They're filming the Christmas Train movie right now in Vancouver. That'll be out over Thanksgiving weekend on the Hallmark Channel. And they've been sending me the dailies every day. When you filmed it the old way on just regular film, you'd have to wait like a week to see the dailies. Now it's all on video. They email me the video, so I get to see all the dailies on my laptop. It looks really cool. They're making Vancouver in August look very Christmassy, which is nice. And I read an article the other day that said the Hallmark Channel ratings are through the roof. They have like tripled since January. And the reason being that, people just want to feel happy about something and, have a good ending and just feel good about themselves since January. I thought about that a lot. I can't build a connection, A and B. It just, so I would say again, any writers in this room, any aspiring writers in this room, follow your dream, follow your passion, just sit down every day and realize that what you're working on would not exist but for you. That's a very special feeling, very important responsibility, but at the end of the day, have fun doing it. Don't make it so serious that you take all the joy out of it, because joy, much like pain, can result in a lot of great stories that all of us in this room can enjoy for a long, long time. Thank you very much, and I'll take some questions.
I wanted to ask about the process of getting a literary agent and how that worked out for you, David.
getting a literary agent. I knew I needed an agent, so my way of getting lists of agents was a little unorthodox. I would go out to, when I'd heard about a first novel hitting really big, I would go to the bookstore and I'd look in the acknowledgments. And they always think they're agent. You know, first it's the spouse, and then it's the agent. If it's the agent before the spouse, don't think that marriage is going to last. But I got a list of agents that way. And I probably committed all the cardinal sins of what you're supposed to do with a query letter. But I wrote a very short query letter, and I had 7 agents. And I made copies of my manuscript, complete manuscript. I sent it up to 7 different agents with simultaneous submissions. They all knew that other agents were reading it. And the query letter said, you know, my name is Dave Baldacci. You have no idea who I am. I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C. This book is about the president, a mistress, a cover-up, and a burglar. And I can guarantee that if you read the first page, you won't stop until you read the last page. Sincerely, me. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, I felt if I couldn't be confident about my material, how could they? And secondly, I knew most of them would read it just to prove me wrong. So they could write back and say, you know what, no, you actually suck. So I was hoping that one of them would write back and say, you know, this has some potential. Why don't you write something else? Let me see how it goes. What happened instead was that all 7 agents contacted me back. All 7 wanted to be my agent, which, trust me, after 15 years of no success, was astonishing. So I went up to New York and interviewed all of them and picked the agent that I have still today. So it was an unorthodox way to do it, but I think, you know, if you're looking for an agent, it's an important thing. It's not just an agent trying to make you money, it's a person who can be a counsel to you, who can be a mentor to you, who can be an advocate for you and advise you over your career. And the one thing my agent told me, he said, look, this book, Absolute Power, I can sell it. Probably sell it for a lot of money. If this is the only book you have inside of you, I have no interest in representing you. I don't represent writers, I represent careers. So that's really what cemented it for me. He was the only one that ever told me that. And that's why he's probably my agent still for the last 23 years.
Hi. So I was wondering, I'm sure as a writer you have so many ideas swirling around in your head constantly, and I was wondering how you decide which ones you want to turn into an actual book.
Great question. You know, with all the ideas swirling in your head, how do you pick the ones you're actually going to sit down to write? Again, there's no rhyme or reason. It really just speaks to the interest level. Sometimes I've read an article that piqued my interest in something, then I went out and did some research, talked to some people, thought about it, and then decided ultimately I didn't want to do it because I just wasn't jazzed enough about it. If it's a recurring character, it's sometimes like, well, I've got this character I developed, like an Amos Decker with Perfect Recall. What would be a great story for him that not only would be an entertaining story as a standalone novel, but how can I deepen and enrich his character even more? It's got to grab your interest as the writer. You may be working on this thing for years, so you don't want to run out of gas halfway through. So it's got to be something that you're really interested in, not just interested in, but you're willing to say, okay, I'm going to spend the next few months finding out more about this, talking to people, going to some of these places, and I have the energy and interest level to do that. And if you carry it through that far, then I think that your decision is probably going to be, I've got this one, I'm going to go with it the whole way. But don't be afraid to just also cut and say, no, I don't have the fire for it. And what you don't want to do is write 200 pages and then all of a sudden, I'm done. It's happened to me. It's happened to every writer. You make those mistakes sometimes. But really, it's almost a gut sort of thing. Am I interested enough in this to be friends with it for 2 years? It's like a relationship. Are you going to be there for it or not?
Hi. So you said that you have a background as a lawyer. I wanted to ask, you said specifically being a lawyer is a great background for being an author. I wanted to ask if there are like specific things in your books that are inspired by your experience as a lawyer, or like techniques that come from being a lawyer that cross over into being an author? And is it as fun and exciting being a lawyer as it is being an author?
Absolutely, yeah. The last question first. It's a lot more exciting being a writer than a lawyer. That's just me. I appreciated practicing law for as long as I did. It made me a better person, a better writer, a better business person. My publisher, my old publisher, used to lament the fact, because you're the only one of my writers who actually reads the damn contracts, understands them, and have changed them, to benefit writers more, which I have done that. There was a book I wrote called The Simple Truth, and that was about a soldier who had unwittingly been exposed, part of an experiment to build a super soldier through chemical process. Didn't know that he'd even been part of this. It was involuntary. And during one of these episodes, he'd actually killed someone. And he'd been in prison for life for it because no one told anybody that that's actually what happened. And the military, which is, nothing against the military. My dad was in the military, and I've written a lot about the military, but the military sometimes make mistakes. And this was based on an actual program that actually they had. It was a super soldier program using PCP to try to make soldiers super during the Vietnam War. And the Army sent him a letter when he was in prison, like 20 years later, apologizing. Whoops, we kind of messed up. And that was the first he knew about it, and the guy went crazy and escaped from prison, and, he didn't know what to do. And my firm had represented a soldier in circumstances similar to that. And after having read, on the subject, that was something that really piqued my interest, and I wanted to do it. As far as sort of attributes of lawyers and writers, we share a lot of commonality. As a lawyer, I would work on big projects, either trials or acquisitions, corporate deals for years. So I was not daunted by the fact that it might take me years to write a book. That's all I was used to as a lawyer, working on projects for years. So every day, it's not like you pace yourself. Every day, you're not going to get it all done in one day. And for a lot of aspiring writers, you get, oh my God, it's been 2 months, and I don't have the book done yet, and don't have the movie sold. And you get frustrated and impatient, and you quit. Pace yourself. It's not going to be done in a day or a month or even a year. And it's about putting little pieces together. With a trial, it's a big puzzle, and you're putting pieces together. The sorts of books that I write, thrillers and mysteries, it's the same sort of thing. It is a puzzle, and I'm putting every piece together, and I have to fit them perfectly, because if one doesn't fit perfectly, the whole puzzle falls apart, and you're going to go like, what was that about? That makes no sense at all. So for me, part of it was cases that I worked on, cases that I knew about, but also just the attributes of what I did every day as a lawyer made the transition to being a full-time writer easier.
Thank you.
Hi, I first heard you speak when you came 6 or 7 years ago.
Did I tell the same stories? I'm sorry if I did. Okay.
No, this is a story. To Carlisle, Pennsylvania's Celebrate the Book Festival.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for that. That started me volunteering with the library more and more. And the question I have with your Vega Jane series, which is different from your other books, it's very interesting. My daughter's very upset that I'm reading her books. The lexicon that you use in that, the made-up words, how do you know when too much is too much, and too little is too little, and enough is just enough?
That's a great question. That can speak to the whole of writing a book. What is too much? What is too little? You have to immerse yourself in that world, and you have to look at it both as a writer and as a potential reader of the book, too. I'm a big reader. Lots of writers read voraciously. So you sort of have to be the creator and also the consumer. And how would I perceive that chapter, that set of words, that character development? Is it too much, too little? If I were a reader of this book and it was somebody else had written it, would I be satisfied with it? So for me, I've been doing this a long time, and one thing you do learn over time is that less is best. And I'm sort of like Hitchcock. I leave something to the imagination. I don't want to write everything out in such great detail you have nothing else to think about as the reader. When you go to see a movie, you see a 2-hour version of what a director thinks the story should be, and you have your soda and your big popcorn and all that, and you go away. You don't really contribute to the process. As a reader, you contribute to the process. A book is never finished, really, until a reader finishes it for him or herself. Then it's finished for them. They can come away with a completely different interpretation. We were talking about this out in the hall. Completely different interpretation of what the writer actually intended. So for the language, it was really, 20 years of having, or 30 years of having done this, of knowing that you got to pull back. Too much is always worse than too little. And if you have too many words, it dilutes the power of what you're trying to do. So for me, I always pull back. I also pull back with the research. I know that 90% of the research that I use is never going to end up in the book. I'm not writing a treatise. I'm not writing, a nonfiction work or textbook. I'm writing a novel. So you can integrate. I might have done 3 months worth of research for a book for a sentence here, a little bit of a paragraph over here, a line of dialogue over there. You never want to turn your research into a flip book where you have no idea where to put all this research. You're so proud of it, you don't want to leave it out. You just and you slap it in the middle of the book. I called it a flip book because you're the reader and you're reading. You're like, oh my God, what is this? And you're like, flip, 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 flip. And you get past all the crappy research that he just stuck there, and you get back to the story. So for me, take the foot off the gas. One more question.
Sorry, I'm short. Hi, I would like to ask, what techniques do you use to develop language, vocabulary, dialogue, and terminology in speculative fiction?
What kind of what I use?
Language, dialogue.
Oh, okay. It depends on locality, what part of the world or the country that I'm in, what sort of people that I'm talking about. And if you look at a book like Wish You Well, we set in the top of a mountain in 1940 in Southwest Virginia. I wasn't alive in 1940, but I know that part of the country really, really well, and the people who live there really, really well. I know how they speak, I know how they act, I know how they would respond to certain things. And that's why it's really important when you're writing a book, you can't sit behind your desk and Wikipedia everything. Anybody can do that. You got to get out and go to the places, talk to people. Being a great writer equates to being a great listener. And listening is a lost art these days. I know I'm up here speaking to all of you. I would much prefer to be in the back watching and listening to all of you. Because I think being a great storyteller means that you just have to have this insatiable desire to know things. You want to know things and more things. You want to know what makes people tick. So really, it's just experience. Every writer writes some stuff based on experience. But at the same time, you have to go out. If you want to write about a world, you have to go out and experience that world as best as you can and talk and sit and listen and eavesdrop and overhear the sorts of people that you're going to be writing about to make it authentic, make it plausible, make it realistic. Because otherwise, you're just typing instead of writing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.